Welcome to Give It a Nudge today. Great episode. Well, I'm anticipating a great episode. Friend of mine coming on the show, Damien Cooley, who some of you may recognize, and his business Cooley. And we're going to talk about a little bit about his past, but more about where he's at now, what his business does now, how it works now, and maybe what might be coming in the future. And I think he's got a few side things as well. So welcome, Damo.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And you're probably the best dressed guests, considering, I even think the private equity guys that came on didn't have a tie on. So you're definitely the best dressed guest we've had on.
Yeah, well, in the real estate industry, I think a lot of agents are getting a lot more funkier with the way that they dress and what they wear.
Who you could be talking about.
Look, for me, my orange tie is my brand. I put a huge emphasis on marketing, the way I look, the way I dress, how I feel. And the orange tie has become synonymous with our business as auctioneers.
Yeah.
And they may not necessarily know my name, but they might say, oh, you're the guy with the orange tie.
Yeah. Do you wear a green one as well?
No. I do actually have a green tie.
I think I've got a green one that's quite similar. I think you may have worn it to the races or something.
Yeah, I wore it at one Melbourne Cup.
Yeah, because I wore this green tie. I can't remember what I think it was this year's Melbourne Cup, and someone said, "You're just like Damo." I was like, "No, he's orange. He's orange."
Yeah, I've got the same version of this in green. Nikki wore a green dress, so
I
wore a green tie.
There you go.
Good bloke, eh?
Well, welcome to the show. So, a quick sort of setting the scene. Tell us a little bit about a tiny bit, because I want to delve into it, and a very short. I know you've had a lot of other podcast interviews where you've talked about how you ended up where you are. I probably don't want to go into that too much because everyone's heard that before. But just give us a quick synopsis to set the scene.
I've been in real estate as an auctioneer for 20 years.
Yep.
20 years in business. We've done over 75,000 auctions.
God.
My first year in auctioneering, I did 392 auctions. I said 385 to someone the other day, but I had to check. So
390.
Yeah.
So auctions happen typically on what, Saturdays, Wednesdays, and maybe the odd night?
I pretty much auction every day of the week.
Do you really?
Look, aside from Sundays, I don't do Sundays anymore. But my best year as an auctioneer, I did 2,364 auctions.
Far out.
Yeah. So, and incidentally, that same year, I did an Ironman, marathons, and I was probably the fittest I have ever been. And I did the most amount of auctions that I've ever done in a 12-month period.
That's
but
insane.
I charged less than what I do now, so the model has changed a little bit.
Shame, you need to switch that around.
Yeah, I still want to do the volume, but charge more.
Yeah.
That's
I didn't know you'd done that. How did I not know you? Because I did that half one last year. I found that I worked a lot harder while I was training, which doesn't make any sense.
Look, the race day is all about the celebration of the training.
Yeah, that's it. The race day is easy in comparison to the training.
I've done multiple marathons, 100-kilometre races.
Yeah.
I've done 2 Ironmans, a couple of half Ironmans.
There you go.
And it doesn't get any easier. In fact, I found it got harder the more that I did.
Well, I think that there's an age element coming in there too. They reckon the first one is your best one because you really are so nervous about it, you train totally properly, and then you're a bit more relaxed about the second one, so maybe you don't do everything as well, and then the race day's harder. This is the theory.
I would say that was probably a fair comment for me. I think I was 17 minutes slower in my second one.
That's not that bad.
Different course. Melbourne Ironman versus Busselton. Melbourne was probably a faster bike.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Interesting. And we talked about this just before, and this is another thing I didn't know about. There's lots I don't know about you, actually. But you were at uni for how long?
1 week.
I love that. So, university dropout, classic.
That's it.
Classic entrepreneur.
I remember the what do you call them, a lecturer?
Yeah.
The lecturer got up in class one day and said, if you're here next week, the HEX debt sort of kicks in. Or the debt program, whatever it was. I can't even remember what it was, but it kicks in. I was like, see you later.
See you later. What, out of interest, what were you studying? Can you remember?
I was doing a straight arts degree.
Okay.
I missed out on doing a law degree by, a couple of percent. I did well in my HSC. I got over 90, but I didn't do well enough to do law. So I had to do arts to then transfer.
Yeah, okay.
And it just wasn't for me.
1 week. That's awesome. And so then from then on, you went into real estate and you started out in leasing and so forth. How long were you in real estate before you decided, right, that's it, I'm going out? Because I think for most people, and a lot of people who watch this show are founders, but a lot of people want to be founders or are thinking about being founders. How long before you made that decision?
to start Cooley.
Yeah. Oh, is Cooley the only business you've had?
No, so when I was at a company called Elders Real Estate in Randwick.
Everyone knows Elders.
And I was doing leasing, property management, and I used to really enjoy watching the auctioneers who would sell for the company. And I didn't have a lot to do with other agents or auctioneers outside of that business. That was all that I knew. And I had great teachers. The leadership within the company that I was at was fantastic. That they really taught me a lot of what I know today. And first day in real estate, I was washing windows. Second day in real estate, I was vacuuming the floor. But I still do all of those things today. And I think the one thing that I've learned throughout my career is that nothing's too big for me to do. And I think that's a great leadership trait and something that I show that the people who work with us. I don't say that I have staff. I always say that people, we work together. And that's the attitude that I've taken through business. So I started in property management. I've never actually listed or sold property. So I've never been what most people know as a real estate agent.
And we'll talk about that soon. But, so you've never once?
No, never once.
Do you need a real estate license to be an auctioneer? You must.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you still have to do that.
Licensing's changed. You used to have a license for this, for that, for this. Now it's kind of like one license.
No.
And you have breakout arms of that license.
Yeah. Okay. So you've never listed.
Did I
property?
answer your question? Maybe I went off on a tangent.
Well, I think you went off on a tangent, but yeah, I can't remember what the question was. What was the question? So no, first company. When did you? So so you're in leasing. You're at Elders. You're looking at the auctioneers, all swingy-eyed, vacuuming the floor. Where did you go from there?
I worked at McGrath for a short stint. I actually ended up going jackarooing.
Okay, cool.
Up north to a place called Mungandai, which sort of sits on the border of New South Wales and Queensland. Most people have heard of Moree. It's a bit north of Moree. And I went jackarooing for about 12 months.
I want my son to do that.
Yeah, it was absolutely fantastic experience.
Yeah.
And I think the values that I learned from boarding school and love for the country, agriculture, also was a good kickstart for wanting to do that.
Yeah.
And a lot of my friends I was a boarder. A lot of my friends were boarders who lived on, outback stations, etc. So that was great fun. I came back and I worked at McGrath again. Mm-hmm. And the catalyst for actually me opening my own business is that I actually got sacked from McGrath. So, often people say I fell into this or I fell into that. I literally did fall in. I was sort of like more kicked into it.
Yeah. Who fired you? Did John fire you?
Yeah, well, John was part of it, along with a few others. But, I made mistakes in my early years and those mistakes turned into opportunities. And I guess it was the way that I handled that situation that has enabled me to be where I am today.
Yep.
And I guess in some respects gave me the courage to go out and start my own business. And a lot of people think that it's a scary thing. To me, it wasn't very scary at the time because there was no other option for me. It was like, you either do it or what else are you going to do? So I didn't have a lot of money. I remember, renting a little apartment down in Beecham Avenue in Maroubra with a couple of mates. And I started with a laptop. I made phone calls. I cut cuttings out of newspapers, wrote people handwritten notes. I made appointments. I met people. And it's all about, prospecting really hard.
And that was auctioneering. You were trying to sell yourself.
I was trying to sell myself as an auctioneer.
And you had no experience as an auctioneer?
Well, I had called auctions, yes. Right. I had called auctions.
As a junior real estate
correct, yep. As a novice auctioneer, I called auctions. I won a novice auctioneers competition, regional final, state final, and thought, shit, maybe this is something I should do.
So what was it about the auctioneering that when you thought, right, I've been fired, what am I going to do? I could go back to uni. That's not happening. I could go and maybe call races at the racetrack because it's not dissimilar. Or I could go and become an auctioneer. What made you go, I'm going to go and become an auctioneer, as opposed to going and trying to get another job in property management or commercial or something? There were other options, I guess.
I've always loved standing up in front of a crowd.
Yeah.
I've always felt that I've had a great ability to speak in front of people. I've never been shy of speaking in front of a crowd.
Yep.
I think that my skill as a speaker is obviously well represented in the auctioneering space because that's what auctioneers do. The skill of being an auctioneer comes with experience, and the more auctions that you do, the better that you get. Same in most industries.
Absolutely. Time
in the game, runs on the board. And I've got the grey hairs now to prove it.
Yeah, I think I've got them too.
So, for me, it was all about, I loved being an auctioneer, and to this day, I love being an auctioneer.
Well, you can see that, right? The energy you have, and people will have seen you on TV, right? You've done a lot of different things. Did you always have the voice? You've got the voice, right? Did you have the voice? Did you cultivate the voice? Do you work on the voice?
I don't. I've done no work on my voice whatsoever.
Do you drink salt water and
No,
gargle?
I do none of that. I do no warm ups or anything between auctions. Or I've probably been more disrespectful to my voice than I could have been over the years. But I don't know. Do I sound like an auctioneer?
Well, you've got your voice projects, right?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Your voice is clear. It projects. You can hear it. You don't need a microphone if you haven't got one. You know, I've done a lot of public speaking. I hate it. I like it once I'm up there, but the lead up to it, like you said, you're never scared of it. It terrifies me to this day.
The first time that I auctioned in front of John McGrath, I was with Scott Kennedy Green, and we were down at the park at Rushcutters Bay.
Yep.
And there were lots of people walking around, and I had to do an auction in front of John. Outside, you know, with people walking around.
Yeah.
So that's probably the most nervous I've ever been.
Yeah.
Before doing an auction, not only just doing an auction, but in front of, you know, the king of real estate, John McGrath.
Who fired you?
Who fired me in the end.
Just to add a little extra
thanks.
element to it.
Yeah, no, look, I've got a huge amount of respect for those guys, and particularly John. Like, he's a pioneer of our industry, no question.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so you're there, you're in Maroubra, you're ringing around. No internet back then, right? There was no online listings. I remember the same recruitment used to put adverts in the paper. I remember these days.
Yep.
How did it go? And what kept you going? Because the first years are usually pretty tough.
My success came very quickly, Steve. Because,
there you go.
Well, it did in the sense that I was very young for the industry to be an auctioneer. Most of the auctioneers that I was competing against were significantly older than me, and at the time I didn't really see that as like, oh wow, here's my opportunity. I'm going to become an auctioneer because of this.
Yeah.
But it evolved really quickly, and people, I guess they were attracted to my energy that I brought to the auction room. They were attracted to my enthusiasm. I looked really young.
Yeah, baby face.
I was 21 years old when I first did my first auction. When I started the business, I was 23.
Of course you look young. You were young.
And people used to often say to the agent, "Is this our auctioneer?" And I always used to say, "Look, don't judge me on the way I look. Talk to me after the auction."
Yeah.
And it was a good time in real estate. The market was doing well when I very first started. The market was doing really well, and October 2003, the market really nosedived. Bidders registrations came in, and the market was pretty tough. So I actually saw that as an opportunity to show my skill as an auctioneer in a harder market than it may have necessarily have been if the market was absolutely booming.
That's true.
And the numbers just kept coming, and the volume came, and I quickly went from doing a few hundred auctions to over a couple of thousand. That's
great. That's really interesting. And that business was Cooley. That was
at the time I called it Rescom Auction Services.
So you were just sole trader, basically.
Residential and commercial auctions. Like
beauty.
Yeah, and then it was Cooley Auction Services, and then Cooley Auctions, and now just.
So it's been the same business. Now you've got a team as well.
Yep.
So talk to me about how it works, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand. I think until I met you, always assumed auctioneers were real estates. You've obviously just said you've never listed a property in your life.
Yep.
So how does it work, and why, if you've got a real estate agent, would I, and who chooses that? Do I choose as the vendor to have an auctioneer? Does the real estate suggest you? How's that sort of all put together?
So essentially there are many real estate agents who are also auctioneers.
Yep.
It's a lot more prevalent down in Victoria, where a lot of agents do their own auctions.
Interesting.
I feel like there's a huge advantage to have a third party doing the auction. They're a specialist in what they do.
Yep.
The agent is a specialist in what they do. The agent is often, their time is taken up by what we call in the industry working the floor. So you're talking to purchasers who have registered, you're talking to them during the auction, you're encouraging them to bid, you're talking to the owner, you're talking to the buyer, you're talking to the owner. The auctioneer is the orchestrator, I suppose, of keep making sure that they maintain the momentum of the auction, the energy of the room. And they're also buying the agent time in some cases, where the owner might want a certain amount of money and the buyers aren't at that level, and the auctioneer is maintaining the mood of the auction, because it's also a direct reflection on the agent's business. So if you've got a rubbish auctioneer calling the auction and
not
people aren't entertained, it's a reflection on the group, the agency that you're selling for.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got someone who's professional, who looks good, who's doing a great job, that also is a positive reflection on the company.
Yeah.
So for us, we are specialists at what we do. We only do auctions, whereas the real estate agent that is an agent and auctioneer, sometimes I'm sure many of them see it as an advantage because they know the buyer. I prefer not to know the buyer because I don't have any preconceived ideas on value.
So do you meet the buyer before?
Sometimes.
But yes, we don't have a
very
relationship.
occasionally, but there's no relationship.
You just roll in. Rockstar.
Yep, literally roll in and roll out. But the beauty of that for the owner is that I'm not emotionally attached to the sale. And I do come as a third party professional who can give them advice based on the situation that's in front of me, rather than having any vested interest in the owner saying yes or the buyer saying yes.
All right, so let's have a scenario, right? Like I said to you, a lot of people don't realise that there are auctioneers who don't become agents and vice versa, right? So if I'm selling my house, who's the one who's going to suggest it? I mean, it's unlikely I'm going to go, can we get a separate auctioneer? Because a lot of people don't even realise that's a thing, right? So is it the agents that suggest it? Is that how it works? Or do you call up people selling their house and ask them?
No, so we don't generally speak to the person who's selling their home. I mean, we do get phone calls from people who are selling their home and ask us who we recommend as an agent, or ask us, would we do their auction? For us, our main client base is real estate agents.
Yeah.
So the agents are the ones that refer us, I guess, to the owner.
Yeah.
Some of those agents have their own in-house group of auctioneers that they only refer to them. Some of them give owners choice. These are 3 auctioneers that we use. Who would you like to use? Most of the people that work with me specifically are sitting in front of the owner saying, you need to use Damien. These are the reasons why you need to use Damien.
And what are they? What are the reasons?
Oh, look, I think for me personally, I try my hardest at every single auction that I do. And whilst I know that is quite cliched, I do believe that I get better results than other auctioneers. I believe that my energy, my enthusiasm that I bring to the room is far superior. You have to really almost watch one of my auctions to understand that. But I strategize on how I can get a buyer to pay as much as I can. And the way that I do that can be in the increments that they're bidding, whether it's a $10,000 increment or a $50,000 increment. We've had loads of situations where a buyer has increased their bid from one number to another number. I had an auction just the other day where we're at $2,150,000. A buyer bid $2,160,000. Took me quite a while to get that extra 10. The owner was selling at $2,160,000. And then the underbidder came back in at 170, but I pushed back on that 170. I said, don't make it 170, make it 2.2. So, and after it was well over 60 seconds. Like after 60 seconds of having an open negotiation with this purchaser on the floor in front of everybody, I was able to get them to bid $2.2 million.
That's pretty full on, isn't it?
If they had a bid to 170, they would have owned it. But I was able to get them to bid 2.2. So for me, the value proposition that I believe that I bring to the table is my skill in being able to read people on the auction room floor.
And I was about to ask you about
what they're going to pay.
So, I mean, obviously what I do, we have to read people. It's pretty much the whole job. I don't think it's something I've learned to do. I think, as you talked about earlier, it's experience. What do you think you have learned? Do you think it's something that are you consciously looking for certain things, or do you just think it's the way someone is and it's almost a subconscious process that you've just learned?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of subconscious involved in it, probably more than anything. For me, an auction can take 2-3 minutes. It can take 25, 30 minutes.
What's the longest?
Oh gosh.
I bet you've had some. Look, what's the longest
maybe
and hardest?
40 minutes or something sort of comes to mind. It's a pretty long auction.
That's a long.
I had an auction today that went for a long time, but we had 4 online bidders, and only one of those online bidders actually bid. We had a vendor's bid at a number. The online bidder came in and they made a bid. We were able to then negotiate with that online bidder to get a further $5,000 increase and then another $5,000 increase, and we sold the property under the hammer. And that's the online platform and how that integrates now with a live auction is something that I actually developed well before COVID.
Yep.
And when COVID actually hit, and you weren't allowed to stand out the front of a house and do an auction for a short period.
Yeah, of course.
We all shit ourselves as to how the hell we're going to survive. And listening to some other interviews that you've done, you've spoken about similar situations where people talk about pivoting and how you're going to do things. I'd already done that probably 2 years before COVID.
So is that a
happened.
separate company, or is that
Yeah,
proprietary to you?
it was a separate company.
Separate company. What was that called?
It was a company called Auction Now.
Yeah.
And that was our digital platform.
Yeah.
So we were integrating online auctions with real auctions. And the way that we did that, it was there were a number of different options, but the most popular was like a hybrid option. So where instead of bidding over the telephone, we developed the software where people can bid from anywhere in the world at any time and bid on the auctions that we were running live in Sydney or all around Australia. And they could bid in real time with no time delay, which was probably the biggest component of it. And exchange, pay the deposit, all in one transaction, all digitally.
So was there a lot of legality problems around that? Obviously there's a lot of regulatory things around auctions. Being from England, obviously I've been here a long time, but the way property is sold in England is absolutely archaic, right? It's so fast and there's no chain here, right? I love it. I think it's amazing, but it's pretty brutal as well in some respects. So I imagine you would have to really think about that, right?
Look, I think not so much brutal. I think it's probably more transparent, frankly. I think it's transparent because buyers can see who they're competing against. And I think that's the beauty of what an auction's all about. It's the fairest way to determine what the value of a property is.
Yep.
It's open market, and buyers, it's the most transparent way to sell and most transparent way to buy.
Yeah.
A lot of buyers get nervous about auctions.
I hate them.
Yeah, then that's a common. It's a common phrase.
I can't go. I have to get someone to bid for me. I can't do it. I get too emotional.
But that's also a good thing too, because it's a good thing to get a professional who does this day in, day out to bid for you, because they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They've done it thousands of times, and that's what they specialise in.
Yeah.
The online stuff for us is we sold Auction Now to a company called Realtair. And I'm still a shareholder of Realtair, but Realtair is now a much bigger business than what I could have ever taken Auction Now to.
Yeah.
So, I realised my limitations, and I think I underestimated how much was actually involved in building a really successful online auction business. I had all the intellectual property, but the wedge, the money, mate, that you need
tech businesses so expensive
to keep these things running. Like, I put over $1.5 million of my own money into it, and towards the end I was bleeding.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not going to put another 1.5 into this. I want to join another company who has a much bigger budget and has a broader reach in the market.
Yep.
And Realtair was absolutely the right fit for us, and Realtair is doing unbelievably well.
How good's that? Well done on that. You had your first exit. You have. It's very hard to exit an auction business because it's you, right? It's even named after you. You can't just go, someone's just going to buy that, right? So you managed to, out of nowhere, take a services company, build a side thing to it before it was required.
Yep.
God's willing, the time came when it was really required because COVID hit. And COVID was very good for Nudge too as well, interestingly. And then you managed to sell it as well, and you're still a shareholder. So you pretty much ticked every box that everyone would ever want to do as a founder building a tech business who doesn't understand technology.
That's it.
You nailed it.
Yep.
Now we've got to come to the important part, the hammer. Do you have your own hammer?
Absolutely.
How many do you have?
I've got one special one.
What's that for?
Well, a guy by the name of Peter Etheridge taught me a lot about everything, a lot about what I know about auctioneering right now. And Pete's a great friend of mine, and I worked with Pete for a little while just before I started Cooley.
Yep.
Pete's a great mentor of mine. I speak to Pete, probably once a week, if not more than that. And Pete, incidentally, now also does some auctions for us.
There you go.
Pete, for my 40th birthday, had a gavel hammer.
Yep. Sorry, I should have got that right. Should have looked that up.
Made for me out of a section of a tree called a mulga tree. Mulga tree sort of has different colours through it, like a bit of a sort of yellowy, sort of browny colours through it. And that's the hammer that I prefer to use in all of my auctions now. I have had lots of gavels over the years. I've managed to lose quite a few of them. I reckon a
How
couple.
do you lose?
I reckon a couple of kids have stolen them at auctions
sure.
previously. I'm a loser of things, mate. Don't worry about that. I'll leave things. I'll leave things somewhere. Forget where I've left them. And
Have you ever had one come out your hand?
I've had the head of a hammer come out as I've knocked it down. And maybe I should have a new insurance policy.
I was going to say, where's the public liability here?
Yeah, that's it. I'm amazed at how many auctioneers don't use gavels.
I've seen them with it's not the same.
They use a contract, they roll up a bit of paper.
I want the drama.
Yeah.
An auction is entertainment as well as a functional activity, but it's a show, right?
Yep.
There's your showmanship in it that helps get the price up, that helps get the emotions up, that help get everyone excited, right? That's part of the auction. It's not just reading that; it's the whole drama of it. So why not have a gavel?
I use the gavel as a tool to entice people to bid, and so in the auctioneering space we have things what we call trial closes.
Yep.
A trial close is like first, second, third.
Yep.
Now, when you go first as an auctioneer, first, second, third, most people think, oh, it's going to sell. Because once you get to 3, hammer comes down. I remember asking a kid what happens when you go first, second, or third, and he goes, "Dad smacks me." For me, when I go first, second, third, that's a trial close.
Yeah.
For me, grabbing my gavel is a trial close. So whoever's working with me on a Saturday, if I'm standing out the front of the home, I'm calling the auction. Now, if I think the pace of the auction is slowing down, now we might have a reserve that's a lot higher than what the current bid is, but I'll move to grab my gavel, and that signifies to the buyers he's going to sell it.
Yeah.
And you'll be amazed at how many people, once I grab that hammer, actually then start bidding. So it's almost a strategy of a buyer to wait until they think it's selling.
So what is this? This has always puzzled me, right? At auctions particularly. The strategy of waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. I'm like, why are you waiting? You're going to bid what you're going to bid. I just don't get it. I don't understand. Do they just think they're being clever? Is it a thing? Are they waiting for it to go on the market? I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's going to get up there anyway. If it's not on the market, you can't buy it. So I just don't. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, look, people often ask me what's the best strategy to buy a home at auction.
Different every auction, yeah?
It is. It's different in every auction for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it depends on the property, which is a direct reflection of how many people want to buy the house or apartment or commercial property.
Yep.
There are different laws around commercial auctions versus residential auctions.
Yep.
So, for example, when you're bidding on a commercial property, you don't have to register. Oh. When you're bidding on a residential property or a rural property, you do have to register.
Yep.
In the commercial auctions, there's no bidding cards. In the residential auctions, there are bidding cards with numbers. For when you are competing at a residential auction, if it's visible that there's a lot of buyers on the property, my advice to any purchaser would be come in with a really strong and high bid.
Yeah.
Try and knock out quite a few of your competitors up front and then bid confidently after that. And it doesn't have to be like in a big increment. It can be a smaller increment, but it's the speed at which you make the bid that is more harmful to the other buyer or hurtful to the other buyer, because they feel depleted that this guy's going to buy this property at any cost.
It's a limelight thing. Like they have the limelight because they've got the highest bid. If you take it away as soon as they've got it, it's awful, right? It's like, oh, he's taking it again.
That's it. And the auctioneer plays on that.
Yeah.
But to answer your question about do you wait right to the end and come in, that is a strategy that some purchasers employ. Look, I think it's a good strategy in some cases because the auction might have gone on for quite some time, and if the highest bidder has been there the whole way and they think, come on, like you'd be amazed how many buyers are standing in front of me saying, put the hammer down, put the hammer down. And, it's almost like the more they say that, the more I wait.
Yeah.
But when that person comes in after that, like right at the end, it can be really heartbreaking.
Oh, God, yeah.
For the highest bidder. So, yeah, the strategy is a good strategy. Does it mean that they end up buying the property? Steve, really, like the person with the biggest budget should be the one that owns the house.
Well, yeah, I suppose that's true. Particularly, that's your job. That's your job to make sure that happens. Now, you talked about the fact that in residential you need to have a number and you need to register, right? So if you arrive in the middle of an auction, you can kind of get in if you register really quickly, right? But if you're not registered, you can't bid. There was a time when that didn't exist. Have you had, you must have with the sheer volumes, have you had a scenario where someone has put a bid in that they didn't want to put a bid in, they put, like the old movie is, someone's put their hand, have you ever had it where they've literally been the winning bid? And what the hell happens?
Yeah, and they retract the bid?
Or can they retract, can you retract a bid?
Yes, in New South Wales, if you make a bid at an auction, you are legally allowed to retract that bid.
Did not know that.
Yep. In other states, the laws are different throughout different states, right? So in other states, you may not be able to retract the bid. But in New South Wales, you can retract the bid, and it's frowned upon.
I'm sure.
It very rarely happens. Sometimes people make a genuine mistake with regards to the number that they've said.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But yes, I have had people retract bids, and I've sold properties to purchasers who, have what we call buyer remorse, where after the auction, they're like, what have I done? I don't want to buy it. I famously had an auction for a client, and it was a really strong result. There's a lot of laws in real estate, and, buyers can get out of contracts if the contract hasn't been prepared properly, or if the contracts haven't been exchanged correctly. So, always best to get the best legal advice that you possibly can with regards to that, because I have sold property at auction, and buyers have one situation comes to my mind where a buyer actually then was able to rescind a contract based on a pool certificate not being included in the contract, and
swimming pool.
Therefore, the contract was deemed incomplete and not
some
exchanged.
Of these laws. I mean, I think I find the real estate laws very frustrating. I find the exchange process ridiculous. I've heard all sorts of stupid stories about, people getting stuck with no property but having lost their deposit because their bank didn't complete at the right time. The laws are mad. Someone needs to redo that. That could be your next tech business.
Yeah, look, there are provisions in place for, if you don't settle on time, there is a period where the buyer has the ability to then complete within a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
And it all depends on the lawyer on the other side and the vendor on the other side. There's penalty interest involved.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. There are situations where people are unable to obtain the finance.
Mind you, that happens in every element of business.
Don't be bidding if you can't afford it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, don't even go.
Yeah, right.
So tell me the funniest thing you've had happen at an auction that actually made you genuinely, have you ever sort of almost lost it laughing? Because you're very cool. I've watched your auctions. They're very cool and collected, right? You're professional all the way through. There must have been times where it's just all gone wrong.
I've had lots of situations where I have been in full laughter. In fact, on Tuesday night when I was doing auctions, I just can't remember the exact situation, but someone was bidding, and the way that they were bidding and their voice maybe, and I was laughing. I was trying not to laugh, but and they also found it quite funny, which the whole room was erupting in laughter. But that adds to the
drama,
the drama of the auction, and that's fun. The craziest thing that I've had at an auction, well, there's lots of situations, but I have had people pass out, like literally pass out.
Maybe
I think stress.
Stress, like a wedding.
Yeah, stress. It can be a big moment. I did have a lady pass out one time, and she literally fell to the floor.
Oh, jeez.
And then stood back up and continued bidding.
Oh, wow.
Right, we got her a glass of water, and I know I shouldn't be laughing, but she then passed out again twice. And the most brutal part about it is that the person who was bidding against them had no remorse whatsoever.
They didn't care.
They did not care at all. They just wanted to own that property. But the lady was fine, and we actually did call an ambulance, and everything was okay. And we did pause the auction for a little while, and thankfully everything was okay. But that was a situation. As an auctioneer, I think legally. So I think, well, hang on, if she stands up and bids again, can I accept her bid? Or is she not in right frame of mind to accept that bid? But her partner was there, and her partner was able to say, no, everything's okay, and we were able to accept the bid. So
there you go.
Interesting situation.
Yes.
But one of the most interesting auctions I've had in terms of dollar value, I sold the old French consulate for $23 million in Bellevue Hill. And, that doesn't really get you even a one-bedroom apartment in Bellevue. I'm joking. But, Bellevue Hill.
It was the French consulate. It wasn't the American.
Yeah, but it was an acre at the time.
An acre?
Yep. So it was a big block of land. Or circa that. Yeah, Lachlan Murdoch bought it.
I know where it is.
But it was the most interesting way to really qualify a buyer. First of all, you had to pay a $50,000 deposit into the agent's trust account, which was
Just to bid?
refundable, just to bid. Was refundable if you didn't own it. You had to sign a piece of paper to say that you would bid over a certain amount of money. And off the top of my head, I think that was 18 million. I might be wrong on that number, but I think it was 18. And you had to write a letter to the French consulate as to why you would be a good purchaser for the property. So they really wanted to vet check all the prospective purchasers. But it was a really good way of determining like who was actually interested in bidding. And did they have the freight to actually buy the property?
Yeah.
But that was an unbelievable auction.
Didn't he buy a few more around there as well then and knock them all together?
I believe so.
Yeah, I believe so too. Someone was telling me that the other day.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's next for you? You know, are you just going to keep on auctioning? Are you got another tech idea in mind? Is there anything that any surprises in your life that you might want to share with us?
I don't think from a tech point of view, I'm going to go down that.
You're done with that?
I'm happy with the techies running their own race. You know, it's a big world, that tech world.
Do you see AI making any difference to auctions?
Look, we're starting to do investigations in and around that. Yeah, I guess in essence, yes, there are options for the online auction to take over what we do. I do feel like the personable experience that people get standing in front of somebody and being able to place their bid and the auctioneer having influence over what they bid, I think that has significant legs.
It won't take. I've done so much research on this AI stuff, particularly because it's going to impact recruitment a lot. And everything I've read is that in reality, 10% of jobs will be replaced by AI, 10%, tiny percentage. The rest will be assisted by AI. No one's going to lose their jobs. They're not going to take over your job or our job. Our jobs might change, but that's it. The personal part, the connections humans have, it's so complicated and it's so unfathomable in terms of working it out. In our lifetime, we're not gonna have massive changes in terms of losing jobs.
In our industry, and I think any sort of service industry, has a lot to do with the people that in the relationships that you have
100%.
with your clients. I'm personally not worried about that in what I do. But I think that there are some businesses that would have concerns over the way that their businesses are run.
Sure.
And the simplification of AI taking over that stuff.
Yeah.
AI has become a bit of a fun, cool word lately that, you know,
it's everywhere.
But really, like, technology is there to assist and to help. And some people it might take over. Our industry, I feel pretty good about it. Look, when I started as an auctioneer, I always had envisage of doing really well and making good money, and I feel like I've done a lot of that. And when you get 20 years in business, you start asking yourself the question, is there something else?
Yep.
Can I branch out into
another? Who knows, right?
Who knows? But I think that if I was ever to do something, I'm the type of person that sort of jumps wholeheartedly into it. I think one of my frustrations of the auctioneering space is that, you know, the only way that we can earn more money is that we either do more auctions or we charge more for our service.
Yeah, because you're not percentage-wise like agents, are you?
No, so whether I sell a $20 million house or I sell a $600,000 apartment, most times I get paid the same.
Yeah.
So I would like to identify some sort of incentive based on value. The challenge that we face with that as an auctioneer, and the challenge that we have always faced with that as an auctioneer, is that our client is the real estate agent, and the agent sells our service, and the agent is obviously the one that puts huge amount of time and effort into winning the business, managing the sale, and we literally turn up on the day. And yes, we have influence over the result, but it's the agent that actually is the one that charges the selling fee, and they get paid based on the value of the property. So an industry where I was able to be rewarded based on the result and not from a numbers point of view, like just volume, where you're based on sale price, buyer's agency, vendor advocacy in the property industry, or maybe it could be development. I'd like to be in a position where I could be advising people on, you know, buying the right sites, amalgamating sites, getting DAs, selling those assets.
It's all sorts of
going through to building phase.
Yeah.
There are options, and I have a huge network of people in the real estate industry that know and respect me. And I know a fair bit about property, so you know,
you would think so.
I've got a lot of those assets, a lot of those things that are going for me. But for the short term, I think that you can get distracted and it's always good to stay in your own lane and make sure that you focus on what you do and focus on what you do really well.
Yep.
And I think that if I can continue being a great auctioneer and continue adding great value to the clients that I sell for, then there's a big future for me for the next 20 years as an auctioneer.
Cool. Any advice, last ditch attempt? Someone's thinking about, they've just done their first week at uni. They're like, I'm out of here. Any advice?
Property is a great game.
Yeah.
It's a great game. You know, you can be significantly rewarded in property if you work hard, you're consistent at what you do, you be a sponge find a good business that you're going to learn from people. And don't chop and change in businesses. I think staying in one firm, if you're in the right firm, stay in one firm, go through the ranks in that firm, and you will be significantly rewarded. Like becoming a real estate agent, becoming a buyer's agent. The buyer's agency is a really exciting business venture at the moment.
Growing massively, so much.
It's growing. It's a growing industry, and you know there are more buyers than sellers at the moment. And they're being hugely rewarded for the service that they provide. And frankly, there's quite a few of them not very good, but there's also quite a few of them that are very good.
It's like that in recruitment.
And you know, I think if I was a young person, my daughter's 14, and I said to her the other day, "Why don't you come jump in the car with me on Saturdays, and I can start teaching you about property?" Like that excites me because I'd like to be able to pass on that knowledge to my kids if that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
But any young person or old person that's wanting to get into real estate, if you're going to make the decision to do it, my advice is that you've got to make the decision to do it.
Yeah.
Don't do anything half-heartedly. It's like training for an Ironman.
Yeah,
you know,
can't do that half-heartedly.
You can't just turn up on race day and think that you're going to finish.
It's not a pretty sight.
Yeah, it's not a pretty sight.
Fantastic, mate. Thank you so much for coming on. I reckon you've dispelled a lot of myths out of auctioneering. And I've learnt even though you call it hammer down, it's called a gavel. Let's see if we can work that one out another time. But thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks, Steve.
Hope you enjoyed today's show. Come back next week and don't forget to subscribe.